December 1951, northwestern Korea. A formation of American F-86 Sabres patrolled at 30,000 feet over the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. Routine combat air patrol. The pilots expected MiG-15 but weren't concerned. American training was superior. American tactics were proven. Then, 4 MiG-15s dove from 40,000 feet at speeds the F-86 pilots hadn't seen before. The Americans broke formation and turned to engage. The MiGs didn't run, they fought. And in the next 3 minutes, the American pilots realized they were facing something new: Chinese pilots who could fly, fight, and win. For months, the United States had dominated the skies over Korea. Soviet-built MiG-15s flown by North Korean pilots were no match for American F-86 Sabres. Then China entered the war, and everything changed. Soviet instructors had trained Chinese pilots in secret: new tactics, aggressive combat doctrine, and numbers that could overwhelm American air superiority. What happened over MiG Alley in late 1951 would prove that American dominance wasn't guaranteed. The jet war was about to become a real fight. When the MiG-15 first appeared in combat over Korea in November 1950, American pilots were stunned. The Soviet jet was faster than anything they'd seen. It climbed at an incredible rate, over 10,000 feet per minute in some configurations. It could reach 50,000 feet, higher than any American fighter could operate effectively. And it mounted devastating firepower: one 37mm cannon and two 23mm cannons designed to destroy bombers with single hits. The MiG-15 wasn't just competitive with American jets. In some ways, it was superior. The F-86 Sabre had advantages too: better turn rate at high speed, more reliable gun sight, superior dive performance, and American pilots had combat experience from World War II. In early 1951, when North Korean pilots flew MiG-15s, American F-86 pilots achieved kill ratios of 8-to-1 or better. The MiG-15 was dangerous, but pilot skill made the difference. Then Chinese pilots entered the war, and the kill ratio started dropping. In October 1950, China sent ground forces into Korea, pushing UN forces back from the Chinese border. By early 1951, China was committed to the war, and that meant Chinese pilots would fly combat missions. But Chinese pilots in 1950 had minimal experience. Most had never flown jets. Many had limited flight training of any kind. The Soviet Union agreed to train Chinese pilots in secret, establishing training programs in Manchuria just across the Yalu River from North Korea. Soviet instructors would teach Chinese pilots to fly the MiG-15 and fight American jets. Soviet Air Force instructors arrived in Manchuria in late 1950 with a mission: turn Chinese pilots into jet fighter pilots as quickly as possible. The training was intense. Chinese pilots flew the MiG-15 in simulation first, learning the aircraft's handling, speed, and systems. Then they flew training missions over Chinese airspace, practicing formation flying, high-altitude interception, and gunnery. Soviet instructors emphasized aggressive tactics. Don't run from F-86, engage them directly. Use the MiG-15's climb rate to gain altitude advantage. Use the heavy cannons to destroy targets with minimal firing time. Attack in groups. Overwhelm individual American fighters with numbers. By late 1951, the first Chinese pilot units were ready for combat. They were organized into regiments and given Chinese markings, but the aircraft were Soviet-built MiG-15s maintained by Soviet ground crews. The pilots knew they were facing experienced American pilots in capable aircraft, but they'd been trained by Soviet instructors who knew how to fight F-86s, and they had numerical advantage. For every F-86 Sabre over MiG Alley, there were 3 or 4 MiG-15s waiting to engage. Lieutenant Zhao Baotong was a 24-year-old Chinese pilot assigned to the 4th Fighter Aviation Regiment in late 1951. He'd completed Soviet training and logged over 100 hours in the MiG-15. On December 2, 1951, Zhao flew his first combat mission, a patrol over the Yalu River with 3 other MiG-15. His orders were clear: intercept American fighter bombers attacking bridges and supply lines in northern Korea. If F-86 Sabres appeared, engage them directly. Don't run. Don't evade. Fight. Zhao's formation climbed to 40,000 feet, above the altitude where F-86s typically patrolled. Soviet instructors had taught this tactic: gain altitude advantage, watch for American formations below, then dive at high speed for the first attack. At 40,000 feet, Zhao spotted 4 F-86 Sabres at 30,000 feet, flying in a loose combat spread. He signaled his wingmen and dove. The MiG-15 accelerated rapidly in the dive, reaching speeds over 600 miles per hour. Zhao's gun sight settled on the trailing F-86. He closed to 1,000 feet and fired a burst from his 37mm and 23mm cannons. The F-86 broke hard right, evading. Zhao followed through the turn, maintaining pursuit. The American pilot was good, rolling, diving, using the F-86's superior turn rate to evade Zhao's cannon fire. But Zhao stayed with him, refusing to break off. His Soviet instructors had drilled this into every pilot. Persistence wins fights. Don't fire one burst and run. Stay engaged. Wear down the opponent. After 30 seconds of hard maneuvering, Zhao fired another burst. Cannon shells struck the F-86's wing root. Smoke poured from the aircraft. The American pilot ejected. Zhao had achieved his first victory, and proven Chinese pilots could fight F-86s successfully. Captain James Jabara was one of the most experienced F-86 pilots in Korea. By December 1951, he'd already achieved 6 victories, the first American jet ace in history. But even Jabara noticed the change in MiG-15 tactics in late 1951. North Korean pilots had been cautious, often breaking off combat when engaged. Chinese pilots were aggressive, staying in fights, using formation tactics, exploiting numerical advantage. Jabara encountered Chinese MiG-15s on December 13, 1951, and immediately recognized the difference. Jabara's flight of 4 F-86 was intercepting MiG-15 near the Yalu River when 8 MiGs dove from above. Instead of engaging and running, the MiGs stayed in the fight, turning with the F-86s, firing at every opportunity, coordinating their attacks. Jabara shot down 1 MiG, but the other 7 continued fighting. His flight burned through ammunition and fuel, eventually forced to disengage and return to base. Jabara's after-action report noted that these MiG pilots were better trained and more aggressive than any we've previously encountered. American pilots would need to adapt. Chinese pilots weren't going to be easy victories. The Chinese Air Force committed hundreds of MiG-15s to the war in late 1951 and early 1952. American F-86 squadrons were outnumbered 3-1 or 4-1 on most missions. Chinese tactics exploited this advantage ruthlessly. When American F-86s entered MiG Alley, Chinese controllers would vector multiple MiG formations to intercept. One group engaging from above, another from the side, a third cutting off escape routes. American pilots found themselves in multi-axis fights against numerically superior opponents. Even with better training and tactics, the numbers were overwhelming. American kill ratios against Chinese pilots dropped from 8-1 to closer to 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 by early 1952. Chinese pilots were learning fast, adapting Soviet tactics to actual combat, and using their numerical superiority effectively. Some American pilots reported encountering Chinese MiG formations of 20 or 30 aircraft, numbers that made engagement suicidal for four-ship F-86 flights. The United States couldn't reinforce F-86 squadrons quickly enough to match Chinese numbers. If the trend continued, China might actually achieve air superiority over northwestern Korea. Several factors nearly gave China air superiority in early 1952. First, the MiG-15 was an excellent aircraft, competitive with or superior to the F-86 in several performance metrics. Second, Soviet training had produced competent Chinese pilots who could fly and fight effectively. Third, China had numerical superiority and could afford losses that would devastate smaller American fighter squadrons. Fourth, Chinese MiG-15s operated from bases in Manchuria, across the Chinese border where American aircraft couldn't attack them due to political restrictions. The MiGs could land, refuel, rearm, and return to combat without American interference. The United States nearly lost air superiority because of political constraints as much as military capability. American pilots couldn't cross the Yalu River to attack MiG bases. Chinese pilots could retreat to Chinese airspace whenever threatened. The sanctuary policy gave China an enormous tactical advantage. Their aircraft were untouchable on the ground. If China could wear down American F-86 squadrons through attrition while building up their own MiG-15 strength, they could control the airspace over northern Korea. That would make UN ground operations impossible and potentially force a negotiated settlement favoring China and North Korea. What prevented Chinese air superiority was American pilot quality and the eventual deployment of additional F-86 squadrons in 1952. American pilots developed new tactics to counter Chinese numerical advantage, fighting at higher altitudes where the F-86 had better performance, using hit-and-run attacks instead of sustained dogfights, coordinating with ground control to avoid being trapped by superior numbers. The United States also sent more experienced pilots to Korea, including several World War II aces who understood air combat fundamentals. By mid-1952, American kill ratios began improving again, not to the 8-to-1 levels against North Korean pilots, but to sustainable 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 against Chinese pilots. Lieutenant Zhao Baotong flew 47 combat missions before being shot down in April 1952. He survived, ejecting over Chinese territory and returning to his unit a week later. By then, the character of the air war had shifted again. American pilots had adapted to Chinese tactics. F-86 squadrons had been reinforced. The Chinese Air Force still had numerical superiority, but couldn't achieve the breakthrough they'd nearly accomplished in early 1952. The air war over MiG Alley settled into a brutal stalemate. Both sides flying, fighting, losing aircraft and pilots, neither able to achieve decisive advantage. The air war over Korea proved that American air superiority wasn't inevitable. Chinese pilots, trained by Soviet instructors and flying Soviet-built MiG-15s, came close to dominating the skies over northwestern Korea in late 1951 and early 1952. They achieved this through aggressive tactics, numerical superiority, and competent flying. American F-86 Sabres remained the better aircraft in the hands of experienced pilots, but Chinese pilots were good enough and numerous enough to make every mission over MiG Alley a desperate fight for survival. The first jet war wasn't the one-sided victory American propaganda suggested. It was a near-run thing, where Chinese pilots in Soviet jets nearly achieved what Germany and Japan had failed to accomplish in World War II, denying the United States control of the air.